This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Oasis Charging, offering commercial and residential customers comprehensive EV charging solutions with a consultative approach. For more information and to schedule a free consultation, go to oasischarging.com. Coming up this week,
we can be a little bit more of a risk taker. We can be a little bit more the crazy little brother who the parents aren't paying as much attention to. We can push it a little bit. And that's one of the reasons I love being with Kia.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 199 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week I have James Bell. He is head of product and corporate communications for Kia America. We're going to talk about Kia's current electrification strategy and really get into what things are going to look like down the road. So, James, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Well, I just want to say two things, Zach. Number one, congratulations on hitting show number 199, which is super cool. But maybe you should have held so I could have been the one to put you over 200. But that's okay. I'm all right with that. 199 is a good spot. But no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and happy to say everything I can without getting fired because I like my job.
Well, I will certainly do my best to help facilitate that and not push too much. Before we really dive into what I know is going to be a lot of exciting things, I'd like to give the audience a little bit of background on who they're listening to and watching. So if you would speak to somewhat of your history and your origin story and how you came to the position that you currently hold.
Wow, that's a great question. And it's interesting. I just spent a week over in England helping my wife move an elderly aunt to an assisted care living place, which is one of these time of life issues. And so that meant that I was in the car with my wife quite a bit. And just out of the blue, she said, you're very lucky. And I said, how's that? She said, I know what you just like get excited about. And I know you love the car business. And I know you love looking at cars and playing with cars and going to cars and coffees and driving cars and doing everything. You have found a way to make a career doing that. Well done. And I was like, wow, thank you, honey. That's very kind of you to say. So I guess that's a nice little intro into the fact that, yeah, I'm one of those that has followed the philosophy of do what you love and everything else will follow. I started off really in the automotive industry working for a company called RL Polk, which it's now a company still exists, but under a new name, basically doing analysis on registration information. So, Zach, you buy a car or any of your listeners buy a car, that registration information is processed to the state, and then that information is processed to RL Polk. And then if there's a recall or any sort of marketing outreach or something like that, Polk data is used to help contact. So that gave me an interesting insight into the car industry, kind of, what's going on behind the curtain, so to say. And it really lit up more of my interest. So I went from there onto the automotive media side. I was the editor of a funny little corner of the Motor Trend group of publications called IntelliChoice.com, editor and publisher of that. Then I was at Kelley Blue Book, a couple other things I did along the way in the media side. So about 12 years of having a new car in my driveway every week. It was fantastic. And as I said earlier, as a car person, wow, that was great. And then towards or actually just at the end of the bankruptcy period, if you remember back, the Obama administration put a gentleman from AT&T to run General Motors coming out of the bankruptcy period because the government was deeply involved in that process. And they had a little problem, GM did at that time, with having a stigma, a social stigma called, GM doesn't stand for General Motors, it stands for Government Motors.
Yep.
And so GM came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd like to move the needle away from that. We think our vehicles are interesting and we'd like to get people to have a look at us again. And so I joined them to help, move the narrative away from the post-bankruptcy period into a new sense of optimism and interest in GM vehicles as being part of, the larger U.S. marketplace.
Yeah.
I did that for about 5 years, 6 years, and Kia saw what I was doing over there, and they said, "We're about to change our brand. We're about to really move this company in a completely unexpected way." I came and looked at some top secret then documents and saw what they were up to, and I said, "Wow, this looks like a delicious challenge." Again, as an automotive enthusiast, seeing the kind of products that Kia was going to be bringing out, but then also just as a human being, it's just fascinating to help a brand change.
Yeah.
Kia was in a situation where they were, I would say, happy enough where they were, kind of like a used car alternative reputation sort of thing. But they wanted to change that, and so I was hired to help facilitate that. And 8 years later, I think we've done a pretty darn good job.
I would definitely agree with that. Uh,
Thank you. I
as
set you up there. Well done.
it's easy to agree with, to be honest. As somewhat of, I still feel like an outsider in many ways, and looking at Kia from a brand perspective, I think at this point fairly common for people to understand that Kia of today is nothing like Kia of 8 or 10 years ago. And
Yeah.
I would imagine that we could probably say the same thing about 10 years from now, that Kia, where things are
Yeah.
going, are going to be maybe surprising to some people that aren't paying attention.
Well, one of the things I learned at General Motors was, once I was inside the company and had a badge and I could be like an ex-member of the media, as I said I was, so ask the tough questions. But because I had a GM badge, I could get the straight answer. And one of the questions I asked was, the build up to canceling the Pontiac and Oldsmobile and Saturn brands, Pontiac and Oldsmobile more than Saturn in this case. What was the thinking? I know General Motors was under a lot of financial duress, so I can understand, limit, kind of paring down their offerings. That makes sense. But they said something very fascinating at the time that I hadn't considered, which was there's something in the automotive industry where there's kind of a generational shifts that occur probably every 10, 15, 20 years. And there's something very tightly wound to the fact that a person does not necessarily want to buy or embrace the brand that reflects their childhood. Now, you might get, 20, 30 years out and think, oh, that there's a nostalgia factor to it. That's one thing. But when you are starting your own family, starting to, kind of build your own identity, having the same car that mom and dad had is probably not the way you want to go. That's just the way humans are. And so that was one of the reasons Pontiac and Oldsmobile were allowed to die, because, again, we had a generation of people who didn't want to or didn't want to buy the vehicle that they had when they were kids. Now, what we see is a new generation coming around that's saying, well, I was raised in the backseat of a Camry or a Honda Pilot or a Nissan Rogue or something like that. Maybe I don't really want what my parents had. And so there's always these interesting moments, inflection points of opportunity where a brand can really change. And then when you couple that with the fact that the average American is in the market anywhere between 8 to 12 years on average. So that means the things we're going to talk about here in 2024, 8 years from, or sorry, 6 years from now, somebody may not even be aware of that because they're just not in market. They're not paying attention. Not to say not everybody's listening to your show. Of course they are. I don't mean anything disparaging there, but between that generational shift of brand perception and the fact that the average American, again, is not in the market every day or every year or even every 5 years, that means that there are moments where a brand can change. And I think that's what Kia has done, I think, exceptionally well. It's one of the reasons I'm very pleased that they tapped me on the shoulder and I had this opportunity, because they did it from a product-led perspective. It wasn't a new ad campaign. It wasn't, a new marketing slogan. It was, we're making different vehicles now, and if you're not looking, you're missing. And that is what when I said at the start of your show here, when I got to see, kind of peek behind the curtain and see what Kia had planned, I said, wow, this is going to be a much different company. I'd love to be a part of that. And so, yeah, I think to your point, 5, 10, 15 years on from now, Kia is going to be even further down that road, and really somebody 10 years from now, you might say, oh, Kia used to be a used car or was a used car alternative, and they look at you funny because that's not who we are now.
I think from an industry standpoint, Kia is
Yeah.
one of the brands that when I look out at who has really identified the opportunity to really grasp electric vehicles and
Yes.
utilize that as a foundation to build on, the Hyundai Motor Group as a whole, but specifically with Kia, it really appears like the brand has taken that and decided to be a leader in the industry versus
Yeah.
somebody that's just lagging behind going, well, we'll see, or maybe we're not quite all in, or we want to provide everything. And nothing against strategies from other brands.
No,
Certainly
no.
on this podcast, I try to be brand agnostic, but
Good.
when it comes to supporting EV Resource mission, my personal mission of pushing electrification forward and ideally as quickly as possible, well,
Yeah.
Kia, I really think from what I've seen, has embraced that. So I really want to dive in and talk about what
Yeah.
is on out there kind of now that you all are involved with, maybe for the near term before we really get towards some of the long-term strategy and roadmap.
Well, first off, if I could just mention, thank you for capturing that, because you're right. EV, this historic transition we're making to electrified personal transportation, it's not unlike the move from horse-drawn carriages to gasoline-powered 120 years ago. It's that historic. We are rewriting, and if I could say that, a fascinating chapter in this industry. And so I am lucky to be a part of it because it is historic. And I think that what the company did was recognize that as we're in the middle of this just, seismic brand change, again, led by fantastic products, this is not just buzz, this is real. That when electrification became an obvious thing for the future, I feel like the company said, ooh, fascinating opportunity. We're already changing perception of this company from a gasoline powered perspective. Now we can do it in electric. And so I think it's wonderful that you picked up on the fact that we as an organization, I mean, we're throttled down. We are fully charged, to use that analogy, and we're ready to go. And so I do know that, like our head of marketing here has said several times in the past, and I totally agree with this. We recognize at Kia that Tesla, bless them, really kind of shocked the system, to use another bad electrification analogy. I apologize, but they did. They did. I mean, no matter how you feel about their products and their ownership experience, they did change the game. As I mentioned earlier, we are rewriting chapters in the annals of automotive industry, and Tesla will get a huge part of that, as they should, to their credit. What we're trying to do is, because they have that huge head start on every car maker, from Porsche to Ford to us to everybody else, is we want to be seen as, we want to be a part of this conversation. Gee, honey, it feels like, maybe it is time for an EV. Your car is getting a little bit old now. Maybe we should think about that EV thing. Yeah, the Joneses down the street just got a Tesla. Yeah, why don't we look at Tesla and Kia? That's the way we want to push this. We know that Tesla has a huge head start, and we credit them for that. But what it's done is pave the way for, I'll say it, more professional in some ways brands like our own to come in with a fantastic dealer network, with a burgeoning reputation for quality and innovation, and put ourselves into that conversation as cleanly as possible. And we're seeing that. When you look at the vehicles that are coming in for trade-ins for Kias, and also especially for Kia EVs, these are coming from pretty high-end brands. The Telluride was a great example of that. We would see, BMW X5s and Audi Q7s and some pretty high Cadillac Escalades, some pretty expensive, luxurious SUVs being traded in for a Kia Telluride. That's when we knew something was up. And then in the electrified space, yep, we're seeing a lot of Teslas coming in and people saying, I'm a little frustrated or fed up with that Tesla ownership experience. I see what Kia is doing. I see the litany of awards you've won from third party brands that I trust, and so therefore I think we'd like to be a part of that. So we feel fortunate from a historical perspective that we are so committed to electrification as it's really starting to launch. And as to your point, I think we will be seen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, pick a time, as a leader in this space because we're all in.
Yeah, that is something that is very clear, as you've mentioned, being product led, where
yes, very important.
I won't name names, but there are certain brands that I have grown frustrated with because they seem to be hitting all the marks when it comes to their marketing, their PR, the way they're talking about what they plan to do. But
Yes.
when it comes to the product itself, personally, I feel that they've kind of fallen short. With Kia, the opposite has been true, where to no fault of your own, I have been largely unaware of Kia's marketing and brand strategy in terms of how you all wish to communicate with the potential buyer. But I've had my hands on the product, and that's what's been most impressive to me mostly. And the one part I will set aside is related to software, and I don't want to get into it right now, but I do have some questions later.
Okay.
But from a product standpoint, comparing the best bang for the buck when it comes to electric vehicles, Kia is consistently one of the top that I recommend for people that are out and about looking for their next car to be electric. So I definitely have to agree with that it is very much product led. And I think that is more important in many ways to the end consumer than how you're talking about it.
Yes, that product-led renaissance or revolution will last. It will become a real, perception change for the industry. 20 years ago, the product perception of Kia wasn't that great. 20 years from now, it will continue to be amongst the best in the industry. So I think that's coming along. You mentioned, other companies that will go unnamed, but based on the kind of description you gave, I know exactly who you're talking about. There's a couple of them. Yeah. So we'll leave that there. I like some of the people who work in those companies, so I'll be nice to them. But I think it's, well, I'll tell a silly little sidebar story if that's okay.
Go for it.
When we were getting ready to launch the EV6, so we have these exchanges with our headquarters in Korea, and we learn about the next product that's coming out, and we ask tough questions and make sure we have all the information that we need on it so we can present it to folks like yourself in the automotive media space and make sure that all the good stuff is shared. And one of the things that they were really adamant about with EV6 was the 800 volt charging architecture. That was something that they really wanted us to promote. And candidly, nobody's looking inside our company here. We weren't so sure that was such a killer app or something that we really wanted to make a lot of noise about. But again, we're at a transitional, fantastic, interesting period in this industry where we're kind of rewriting the rules as we go. And so I remember going back to Korea and saying, yeah, here's the 7 or 8 things we're going to really push on, and design and driving dynamics and efficiency and all this kind of good stuff. And they said, oh, but you got to talk about charging, 800 volt charging, 800 volt. So I will just say out loud, we grudgingly kind of said, yeah, we'll talk about that too. What we didn't realize, because the industry is in such a state of change, is that that would become a big thing. What we basically have with our EV6 and our EV9 and all EVs, Kia EVs going forward, is because we have spent the extra money and invested in these higher speed onboard charging systems, we've future proofed your EV purchase. Some of the other brands that you referenced, which will go unnamed, have maybe not gone that far. And so when they start, somebody buys one of those vehicles, and trust me, the vehicle's fine. It's going to go up and down the road as well as any other. But 3 years from now, 4 years from now, as the EV infrastructure continues to grow, gosh, 2 years from now, because it's coming fast. The idea of, when you see somebody or speak to somebody with an EV say, yeah, I go to a high-speed charger and I'm, back to 80% in 12 minutes. In fact, I just did that this weekend. It was a lot of fun with my EV6. And sure enough, 12 minutes later, boom, I'm ready to go. There's certain brands from other car companies that will not be able to do it that fast. And so that was one of the moments where again, I would say we on the Kia US side were not aware of how fast this business was moving and how the benefit of, as I used the term, future proofing is so important. And it's given us a huge leg up. So if any of my associates from Kia in Korea are listening, thank you for being pushy on that. We appreciate it.
If I may, I've got a quick antidote to add on to that.
Sure.
Where with the EV charging space, that's something that I've been starting to get more involved in.
Yeah.
And if you have a charger, and there is a charger here in Richmond, Virginia, where I am,
yeah,
that is advertised as a 200 kilowatt charger.
Okay.
Well, it's up to 1,000 volts, but 200 amps. So that's where the 200 kilowatts comes from.
Yep.
But if you have a 400 volt max, essentially, to the architecture of the battery that you're trying to charge, the most you're going to pull out of that is 80 kilowatts.
There you go.
If you have an 800 volt car, now you're looking at 160. And to the best of my knowledge, there isn't 1,000 volt architecture. I know there are some that get kind of close. But
yes,
you can pull with the Kia twice the power from the same charger just because of that one little distinction. And while a lot of people are somewhat ignorant to that technical detail, it doesn't change the consumer experience, where if you have one of these vehicles and you continually are charging slower, regardless of whether you know why or not, that impression in your mind is going to build on the overall experience that you have owning that vehicle. And even if you're not aware of it, that will absolutely play a role in how you view the brand, the vehicle itself. Yes. So in many ways, yes, it future-proofs Kia for maybe that person that's buying their first EV. But I would almost build on that to say that it retains that customer that's looking to maybe purchase their second, third, or further.
And more importantly, I agree with everything you just said, but it will then also become a conversation at the backyard barbecue or the kid's birthday party or in the parking lot when you're unplugging your EV for somebody to walk up and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. How's that going for you? And, I guess the layman's way of explaining that high-speed charging benefit is it's almost like certain current EVs on the road. It's like, to use the gasoline analogy, the nozzle or the pipe that from the nozzle down to the gas tank is narrower, so it goes slower. Whereas on a Kia, it's a big pipe, and so you can get it in and out as quickly as possible. And I think those are, to your point, not only for the person who's owning and driving that Kia vehicle is going to have that better experience for their subsequent consideration, but especially because we are in such a historic transitional time, as I've said a couple times now, those bob down the road, those little driveway conversations or parking lot conversations or birthday party conversations are what's really going to move this industry. Because I know there's a lot of people who are very aware of electrification, but feel for some reason it's not right for them yet. And that's something, and I'm sure you espouse this on your in your content all the time. You would There would be very, very few people, I think, currently that would not find the EV experience to be the best. And those people, I'm just going to be very stereotypical, are those that say, "Hey, it's Saturday morning. Let's drive to the desert and go camping suddenly, with no planning." Or, every other Friday we drive to Grandma who's lives 8 mile or 800 miles away. But somebody's a real road warrior.
Yeah.
Maybe EV's not your best move today. Soon, but not today. But a vast majority of everybody else that's listening right now are not those road warrior folks, are those that are driving the American average, I think is about 28 miles per day. If I've got an EV6, it's got 320-mile range, and even at your 40 miles or so per day, I'm not charging every day, folks. It's not a super stressful thing, and because I've got the 800-volt charging infrastructure built into my car, I can use a high-speed charger to its full benefit. So yeah, it's again, it's just a delicious time, and all these little idiosyncrasies, all these little learnings and especially, as I said, the little conversations in the margins by people who own an EV and they tell their friends about it. We think that Kia's got a huge advantage in those moments.
I absolutely love where this conversation is going. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back at it. Turn everyday shopping into savings with the Upside app. Whether it's fueling up, grocery shopping, or dining out, Upside lets you earn cash back on your purchases without limiting how much you can save. You can even combine it with other coupons, discounts, and loyalty programs, so it's a win-win for both you and the business you're buying from. So buy what you need and feel good about it. For more information and to download the app, click the link in the show notes to support the EV Resource Podcast. Hey, everybody. I just want to thank you real quick for watching, listening to, and supporting the show. Your support is what keeps this podcast going. To get all of the URLs, codes, deals, and discounts from our partners, you can go to ev-resource.com/deals. So please consider supporting those who support us. Because of what has been built on, the foundation that's already in place, I think that lends a lot of credibility to the brand when you announce that you're going to have 11 new EVs,
Right.
or a global sales target of 500,000 EVs, or so on and so forth.
Yep.
Those types of claims or intentions are announced. Well, there's a lot more credibility behind it than a brand that maybe every EV that they've made up to a certain point they got rid of.
Right.
Like there's certain things that you look at what is actually in play, not just the words that are
Yes.
coming out of a press release. So I want to talk about Kia's Plan S strategy and the overall electrification roadmap, if we can get into some of those announcements and some of the vehicles that are coming down the road. I haven't looked too deeply into this because I genuinely like to be curious and also
Good.
give a legitimate reaction when you say something that I'm hearing for the first time. I want to be excited by that versus having to pretend to be excited. So let's
Well done.
dive into it. What can we expect from Kia for product offering coming down the road here?
Well, I think you mentioned Plan S. If I just talk about that for a second, that was announced in very similar time frame back in 2021 when we came out with the new logo. That was another huge change, which was very, very positive. Plan S, the S stands for shift. And what that is moving our, we could see that the industry was going to shift to electrification. So as we said earlier, we wanted to make sure that our company was as in the best possible, pole position to be a part of that. So Plan S is Plan Shift. Going forward, you're going to see from Kia vehicles that we hope continue to find those little white spaces. EV9, a 3-row, 7-passenger, off-road capable EV from a company that you know is going to be around forever and has a dealer network ready to assist. EV9 came in at a spot where we knew we had a unique moment in time because the competition was much higher priced and maybe still a little under review as to how long the prospects for the company. I think they're very good. I don't mean to sound negative, but it's still a question. They are still a startup. We are not. So there's that. The next EV that we've got coming out for the US market will be the EV3. And this is, again, going into a perfect little white space where this is going to be what we expect the EV market to really change is away from, how do you say, like flagship type products for people's homes. They're, a luxurious EV is a wonderful thing, but where the business really makes the most sense is in commuter type machines. Yes. And that's where we think EV3, again, we are in a delicious spot to have something that's going to occupy a white space. Number one, it has a look of a kind of a shrunken EV9. And with EV9 winning Car and Driver 10 Best and SUV of the Year and World Car of the Year and Design this and that of the year, we think a miniaturized version of the EV9 will probably be pretty well received because it's already a good looking machine. And now you bring that capability and that technology into a more affordable, smaller commuter type SUV machine. We're hoping to have the starting price to be around 35,000. So again, that changes the game from I'm going to buy an EV, as something to be very expensive or only used for special occasions to no. This is the vehicle that the person in the household who's in charge of taking the kids to school and making the grocery store run and going to pick up grandma now and then. That's the car that needs to be EV. That's where the efficiency really comes in. And so we're excited about EV3. We're also excited about EV4, which we showed the concept versions of both of those vehicles at the LA Auto Show last year. And again, kind of occupying a new niche that people will sit back and go, "Oh, that's an EV. Wow, I don't have to buy gasoline. No, and I can afford it easily." All those things are going to light bulbs in people's heads to really accelerate the transition to electrification. And I think that's where Kia is so well placed to not only be a part of that, but to really push it forward. And so we're going to continue to look for niches in the industry that aren't being served. And because we have such a great engineering and technical prowess in electrification, we feel like we can take that electrified transportation and put it into lots of different segments very successfully.
The EV3, I believe, is actually being released in Europe first, and then
Yes, that's right.
to North America. Will it be somewhat the same with the EV4 as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially for the European market, that smaller SUV size is where a lot of the heat is. That's where the business is. So it's a big market for us here in the US. But as I said earlier, the EV9 3-row SUV is where a lot of the attention remains. So that's why we're excited to have EV9. In fact, we were the first market globally to have EV9 because it makes so much sense for the US marketplace. For EV3, yeah, it'll be in Asia first, then Europe, and then come along to the US market later next year.
Okay. Yeah, I think I recently got an invite to see the EV3 at a UK dealership, and I'm going.
No,
I'm like, I can't just go over there to look at a car.
well, good for
But
you. You're obviously in the right circles.
it put it very much on my radar, specifically, in terms of that model. I When I look at the US or really North American market, because Canada is very similar to what the
It
rest
is.
of us are looking for. I'm sad because my personal wants and desires for a vehicle are very, very different from what it seems the consumers want generally is the EV9. It's that big, heavier, the impression of safer, even though smaller vehicles can be very, very safe.
You can
Uh,
avoid more things if you're more nimble.
yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Not that Kia's going to sell a motorcycle in the U.S. anytime, but
Not yet.
uh, the EV3 and smaller vehicles, I really would love to see more of that, especially at the lower price points that make them more affordable. Because you do two things: one, by having something that's lighter, you have less mass to move, you can improve efficiency, and therefore
Yes,
some of that lower cost can be because the battery doesn't need to be as big.
that's
But
right.
then also, you move into a place where people do not have that argument anymore that, oh, well, EVs are just toys for the rich. Like,
Correct.
I've said this before in a number of recent episodes, that as we move into the next adoption group on the adoption curve, they're more
Yep.
pragmatic. It's more about, well,
Yep.
is this going to fit into my life versus being a statement of support for a certain political ideology or environmental reasons. We're moving away from that. The next groups really just want the best vehicle for their life that's cost effective and fits really well in terms of how they want to use the tool.
As I mentioned, when I first got in the automotive media space, I was with this website called IntelliChoice, which is all about cost of ownership. And so that gave me a real interesting kind of window into that way of thinking, because as just a car nut, of course, I'm first attracted to the high power, gorgeous,
Yeah.
unnecessary type vehicle. I would
Necessary.
be, yes.
Necessary.
Yeah, well, depends on your definition, but I like that. So, but what working at IntelliChoice taught me was that the smartest car buyer is one that says, "Okay, I really like that machine. Is it going to really amplify and fit into my life?" And there's so much that goes into the U.S. market for kind of pushing that go anywhere, jump in the car, disappear, go camping, go climbing a rock on a mountain attitude. But what are you really doing? And I think that's, again, to your point about that next level of adoption, and the next group of customers, which is going to be a bigger group than those that have maybe embraced the luxury or kind of more you know yeah, luxury or high spec EVs. When we get that same EV experience affordable, practical, useful, and then people push that up against what they're really going to do with it. Oh my gosh, it really, when you're very, very honest with yourself and how you're going to use your next vehicle. I agree with you in wholeheartedly that the more efficient to purchase and efficient to use smaller EV as a commuter or as a small family hauler is the gold. Since we're in the middle of Olympics right now, it's the gold medal,
There you go.
no question. And so I think, and then also, as I said earlier, from brands that are going to be here forever, and Kia is one of them. So I'm very bullish on our opportunity, because we've changed so much in the last couple of years, and that's only been amplified by the move to electrification.
How much of the strategy for Kia is an internally sourced strategy versus being something that might be influenced by Hyundai Motor Group and the
Hmm.
overall, um, the overall group from an external kind of influencing the internal strategy? Is there,
Hmm.
can you speak to like whether one is more, has more strength than the other?
Well, yeah, just for any of your listeners who aren't clearly aware, the Hyundai Motor Group, back in the early 90s, if memory serves, Kia was, there was some sort of Asian economic bubble going on, and Kia and Hyundai were bitter enemies just in the Korean marketplace. And Kia was not doing as well as Hyundai, didn't have the resources that Hyundai does. If you think about the Hyundai company, they make the metal that makes the ships, that carries the cars. I mean, they cover all bases. It's a huge economic juggernaut. And so they purchased Kia, um, and kept that brand alive, and now has set up the two to be very complementary to one another. When it comes to how we go to market, though, we're bitter enemies from that side.
Okay.
There is obviously technology sharing in the backside. There's larger strategic decisions that are going to be good for both brands, but we're very, very independent and very unique as how we engineer our vehicles, how we a final state of tune, the way they handle, the way they look, the paint and details about them, all very, very unique. And I would bet that if you took an EV6 and an Ionic 5 and put them side by side, 9 out of 10 people who aren't dorks like us, who know the industry, uh, would never ever guess that they came from the same company. And I think we're very, very good at that, at keeping that separation. So, yeah, we are
Yeah.
the. I guess you could say we're the benefactor of the Hyundai Motor Group's huge investment and commitment to this. But well, let's just say that our current chairman, who's the grandson of the founder of the Hyundai Motor Group, he was in charge of the Kia brand probably 10, 12 years ago, something like that. He has a very I'm told he has a soft spot for the Kia brand and really enjoys what this brand can be different from Hyundai or different from Genesis. And we can be a little bit more of a risk taker. We can be a little bit more the crazy little brother who the parents aren't paying as much attention to. We can push it a little bit, and that's one of the reasons I love being with Kia, because we can make we can be a little riskier, and but we have the great fortitude and support of the larger group.
Overall, what would you say is, or really, I mean, maybe what would be the most significant characteristics of the brand's identity, and
Hmm.
who that would relate to in the consumer market for being the ideal customer?
Wow, you got an hour? No, I'm just kidding. No, I think if I was to kind of encapsulate or personify this brand, it is somebody who is uh, who wants chafes against the status quo a little bit. As I said at the very beginning here, we know that there's an opportunity. Historically, it's been proven over and over that when a generation comes into a new generation is about to take over, they want to step away from what their parents did. So we think we have a great opportunity with that next generation to Kia can become their own, so to say. So it's but there's a little bit more of an attitude, I think, with the Kia owner. Some of might come from the previous reputation of the company of being kind of that used car alternative, not being the first on the list when it came to consideration, maybe being more budget or finance driven. That's changed. And so now I think the average Kia buyer today relishes the fact that they, pull into the parking lot and have somebody come up and say, wow, that's a nice looking car. That's a Kia. And have somebody say, yeah, yeah, it sure is. And I'm a smart buyer for knowing that. And now I'm taking advantage of all that the engineering prowess that the company also can give. So yeah, I think it's a progressive buyer, but it's also a smart buyer, and it's one that feels confident in themselves and wants to do something a little bit quirky, a little bit different, and be a little bit more. Well, I'll just say it, a little cooler.
Sure. If I had to really hone in on one Kia vehicle that I would say embodies that more than any of the others,
Yep.
un- unfortunately, it's not an EV. It would be the Stinger.
Oh, you beat me to
We've
it. I knew you were going to say that.
got
I knew
a
it.
powerful, fun, all-wheel drive vehicle that, in many ways, will just it's. Forgive me if this is the wrong way of saying it, but my impression is that it's kind of like a big middle finger to every other car out there to be like, yeah, like it exudes confidence and this edginess that you're like, yes, it's a Kia, and it's but also having like it's earned its place. It's not trying to pretend to be something it's not. It legitimately is just an amazing vehicle, amazing technology. So I'll give you a chance to respond to that, but then also I want to make sure that I communicate this, being that I don't lose my EV audience.
Sure.
What can we expect from Kia that is an EV that might be very similar in terms of the way the owner feels or communicates about themselves by owning that car?
Okay. Well, first thing you mentioned here about the Stinger, when I'm an old man, I'm, sitting with my grandkids on my knee, I'll be that guy to say, Grandpa, we don't want to hear the story about you launching the Stinger again. It was so much fun because of everything you defined, that it was a shock to the automotive system. Wait a minute. This company is doing a car that looks like that and drives that well. And my first trip to Korea was to see the internal code on the Stinger was called CK, and I was going over to see this code, or sorry, this future product. And I remember vividly standing back and seeing it in the metal for the first time and thinking, wow, this is a good looking car. This really is not going to be expected from the Kia brand. And then I was able to drive a very early pre production kind of testing mule. And I came back. And again, I used to be on the automotive media side. I driven lots of very aggressive and sporting cars in my time. And I came back from that drive and said to the team there, amazing. This thing, it backs up the looks with the driving experience. It's not a poser by any measure. And they were all apologetic. Oh, no, 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 no. We've got lots of improvements to make. That's not the final spec by any measure. And I said to myself and to them, wow, you're pretty good already. If you're going to only improve that, this car is really going to shake things up. And to your point, it did. I feel like, we talk about the history books being written. Kia's transformation was driven, no pun intended, by the Stinger. I feel like the Stinger kind of dented the steel doors, holding the brand back. And then the Telluride came along and just blasted that right apart. But the Stinger dented them in the first place. The Stinger put the stress on the locks, and then Telluride tore through it.
The battery.
And now our electric vehicles are continuing to push that momentum. So yeah, between Stinger to Telluride to our EV lineup, it's been let's just say it's becoming a bit of a juggernaut. We're really up to a great momentum here. As far as vehicles, electric vehicles that kind of will echo, if you will, the Stinger experience. I told you at the start of this, I'll tell you everything I can without losing my job because I like my job. So I have to hold the cards a little bit, but I will say this: I mentioned earlier that the big chairman, the boss of everybody here inside these buildings and the Kia and Hyundai group, is a big fan of Kia and knows what Kia can be and knows what the Stinger was and knows we're going to electrification. So I'm just going to allow you to draw your own conclusions about that. But I would say watch this space. We're going to have some really fascinating products that are going to be, as I said earlier, using the prowess of our electrification engineering and strategy in ways that are highly emotional.
I'm just gonna put my pennies over here. I'm gonna start piling them up.
Good call.
What, and this is just personal anecdote, but what the EV industry in many ways lacks is an accessible family sports car. And by family, I mean probably having 4 doors just because that's practical. But one that is like, from a Kia perspective, it would almost be like a Korean muscle car, where
Sure.
this would go toe to toe with whatever Stellantis and Dodge could come up with over the next 10 years. Like,
yep.
the people that in many ways are most resistant to electric vehicles are
Yep.
the ones that love the sound of a cammed out V8 from a Camaro just sitting there idling. They're the ones that are going to be sitting in their cars at the traffic lights revving just because they like to hear it. um, I would love for that spirit to be embodied and continued. And I think of all the brands that could that are not the ones you immediately think of, I think Kia would
Yep.
be the one that I would kind of throw that over to go, please, we want that.
Yes. Well said, and duly noted, by the way. Yeah, and I think Stinger allows that. If we didn't have Stinger, the idea of a emotional, kind of more interesting EV uh, would feel forced.
Yeah.
But we have that heritage now with Stinger,
Mhm.
and then on the luxury side, we have that heritage with Telluride. So there's a nice new place for the brand to fit there. Um, I will just, again, don't want to get in trouble for sharing too much,
I
but
will read between the lines.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But I will say that I recently was in Orlando and I went to rent a car, and there was a MX-5 Mazda there in the rental fleet. I was like, wow, how could I not take this? And it echoes some of the things you're saying, how great it would be. And I'm not saying, everybody, that Kia is going to have a two-seat EV Roadster in the near future. I'm not saying that, just for very clarification. But that spirit or that idea is will really what will amplify EVs to not just be a toy for the rich, or not just a commuter car, but a car that can be anything.
Right.
And by the way, you don't have to go to the gas station anymore. And by the way, I can tell you there's going to be charging availability very quickly, very much everywhere. So as soon as some of these dominoes start to fall, I agree with you. A brand like ours can fit into that space. And because of how the larger Hyundai Motor Group organization sees us, the opportunity is very much there.
Well, you've got me very excited now, and
Good.
certainly I, like everybody else, we will just have to wait and see what's coming down the line. Um, for good or bad, we will have to wait and see what's coming.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
not to be overly confident, but our foray into electrification has been incredibly successful. I mean, to the point where sometimes I shake my head as I'm driving home and thinking, wow, we've really done some of these things, especially in electrification space recently. And that's just with EV6, EV9, EV3 on the road, EV4 coming soon. So we feel like we're on a pretty good run here. And so, yeah, we're not backing down. That I assure you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, anything that you want to mention that you feel like we might have missed that is absolutely imperative the audience hears?
I think it's really just that, and I know your audience is already very EV excited, so I'm singing to the proverbial choir here a little bit. But I would say to your audience, please help us be agents for sharing with more and more people that an electric vehicle is, if they make that jump, they're only going to be happy. They're not going to look back and say, "Wow." You mentioned the I can't say it. Political nature, at some degree, of electrification. That makes me crazy because it's just not fair. And I think that the more and more people make the move to electrification, especially when it's more rational and more affordable, uh, it just becomes so obvious. And so please keep up the good work. Share it, get people to give it a try. And if they happen by a Kia store and see an EV6 or an EV9 or soon to be EV3 and EV4, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Excellent. Well, James, I end the podcast by asking my guests two questions. The
Yeah.
first one, I don't expect will be a surprise to people. That question is, what do you drive?
Oh, well, as part of my role, I have the distinct advantage of getting a company car. So I actually, two of the cars we've discussed many times here, the Stinger. I had two of them, and I extended both of my leases, my company car lease, as long as the company would allow me to, because I did not want to give up my Stinger. I quite enjoyed that car. But I then, about 6 months ago, moved from a Stinger to an EV6, and now I'm not looking back. I'm really all in on the EV life. It made me realize that I was being a bit silly to tell people how great EV life is if I wasn't doing it myself. Now, just quick little note here. I'll tickle some of your deeper EV enthusiasts. In 2016, I bought a Mercedes B-Class electric because I wanted to see what the electric life was like. Now, that little guy got about 85 miles on a charge. I made it work. So I was already a big
Early days.
proponent of, yes, yes, sir. I was already a big proponent of EVs, but now I'm in an EV6 and I couldn't be happier.
Just out of curiosity, what trim level for the EV6?
GT line.
There you go.
GT
Okay.
line. I considered going GT, but I sometimes a longer journey is I'd like to have a little more range, and also I don't need 576 horsepower. I'm probably get myself in trouble with that. Now, as a counterbalance, my other vehicle that I have, which I only bring out on special occasions, is a 1966 Volkswagen microbus that has been restored back to its original glory. It's actually my dad bought it new in '66. So at one side, I'm really nicely kind of karma balancing between those two vehicles.
Sure, sure. Now we just need the EV conversion on the bus, and you'll be good to go.
It's funny. I spoke to at the Electrify Expo. I met a guy who had a bus that had been moved over to electrified propulsion, and I would be lying if I said I didn't really drool over that idea.
Yeah.
But that would probably also whack the value of my incredibly overpriced Volkswagen. So I'm not going to do that.
Fair point. Fair point.
Yes.
Well, the second question, and this is the last question, is a play on the word drive, where instead of what do you drive, what drives you? Where when you wake up in the morning, what is it that's really your driving purpose for getting up and doing what you do?
It's just incredible appreciation. And I don't know, I can almost get emotional over it of how much I feel incredibly blessed to work in an industry that I would do this for free. Don't tell my bosses that, but but what drives me is the fact that I'm in this. I'm actually I'm in the industry. I'm able to impact the industry and do it for a company today that is very, very aggressive. And in many ways matches my own kind of personality as how we want to change the business and leave a mark. And so, yeah, I guess if I was to answer your question, what drives me is the fact that I'm just one of the luckiest guys on the planet, and I'm going to keep doing this until they tell me to quit.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
And certainly a big part of this really was to share Kia with the audience, specifically about the brand and what we could expect. Even some of the things that we may not know what it is, but
Yep.
I'm going to be hyper focused on that. I can tell. But really just to get an idea of almost who Kia is more than the what Kia is. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and be able to share that. And so thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you. Just as kind of a closing image, I see the Kia brand, maybe 7, 8 years ago, even more so. There's kind of like a fog or a wonder about this company. And again, I'll go out 5 or 6 years ago and say it was even more so. And because I'm inside the company, I know that we've already seen some great stuff come out: Stinger, Telluride, EV9, so on. I know there's more to come. And so if any of your listeners, kind of say like, there's something good going on there, I'm just not quite sure what it is. If I've done anything here today, it's to convey that you're right. There's something very good going on here. And I can assure you we're not done yet.
I really hope you've enjoyed this podcast and want to thank you so much for being here. If you haven't left a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it. And if you have any feedback for the show, questions for me, or just want to reach out and say hi, you can email me at hello@ev-resource.com. The EV Resource Podcast is a production of Evo Spark Media Group and is supported by viewers and listeners just like you. Supporters of EV Resource on Patreon include at the director tier, Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper, and at the executive producer tier, Christopher Lawrence and Dave Laansma. To get ad-free episodes of the podcast, free EV Resource merchandise, support recognition, and to join in the community discussion, you can head over to patreon.com/EV Resource. I've been your host, Zach Hurst. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time.